Close your eyes and imagine standing in the oldest library in the world, not a building of polished marble and ordered shelves, but a house of baked clay, where knowledge sleeps in fragments, pressed into tablets by hands that turned to dust 4,000 years ago. You reach for one of these ancient documents, its surface covered in wedge-shaped marks, each one a window into a time when the gods walked among men, when the heavens touched the earth, and when humanity's very purpose was written not as philosophy or poetry, but as a simple, brutal fact. You were made to work, you were made to serve. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself and let's dive in. The truth about human creation, according to the oldest written records on Earth, is not what you learned in school. It is not gentle. It is not poetic. It is shockingly pragmatic, almost industrial in its cold efficiency. The Sumerians, those brilliant architects of civilization who gave us the wheel, the written word, and the 60-minute hour, left behind thousands of clay tablets. And buried within their ununiform script is a story that has haunted scholars, inspired believers, and sparked one of the most explosive alternative theories in human history. The story is simple, disturbing, and impossible to ignore. The gods needed workers, so they made us. You stand now in southern Mesopotamia, in what is today Iraq, in the land the ancients called Sumer. The year is approximately 2500 BCE, though this knowledge was already ancient when it was written down. The sun beats mercilessly on the flat alluvial plain between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. This is the cradle of civilization, not a metaphor, an archaeological fact. Around 4500 BCE, a people scholars call the Ubaidians began settling this region, draining marshes, developing agriculture and trade, establishing the foundations of urban life. Then came the Sumerians themselves, arriving sometime between 3600 and 3000 BCE, speaking a language unrelated to any known tongue, bringing with them an explosion of innovation that would change everything. By 3000 BCE, this land was dotted with city-states, each one a marvel of human organization. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, Lagash. These were not villages. These were true cities with populations reaching 50,000 to 80,000 people. Massive irrigation systems, specialized craftsmen, and towering temple complexes called ziggurats. The Sumerians invented cuneiform writing around 3200 BC, one of humanity's first writing systems, initially for accounting, but quickly evolving into a tool capable of recording law, literature, and the stories of their gods. They developed sophisticated mathematics based on a sexagesimal system, base 60, which is why we still divide our hours into 60 minutes and our circles into 360 degrees. They created the wheel, the plough, and monumental architecture. They established the first known law codes. They were, by any measure, extraordinary. And they had gods, not distant abstract forces, but a complex pantheon of beings with names, personalities, families, and very specific demands. At the top of this divine hierarchy was An or Anu, the sky god, the distant patriarch. His children were the Anunnaki, a term meaning princely offspring or those of royal blood, the great gods who controlled the fate of humanity. The most powerful among them was Enlil, god of air and storms, who split heaven from earth and became the executive authority over the world. His brother was Enki, called Ea in Akkadian, the god of water, wisdom, and magic, the clever scientist of the pantheon. These were not metaphors for natural forces. To the Sumerians, they were real. Physical beings who lived in temples, required food and drink, and intervened directly in human affairs. But here is where the story becomes strange. Here is where the ancient texts say something that no creation myth should say. They do not describe humanity as beloved children of the gods, made in divine image for a noble purpose. They describe us as a product, an invention, a solution to a labour dispute. The text that lays this out most explicitly is called the Atrahasis, an Akkadian epic recorded on clay tablets dating to around 1700 BCE, though the story is certainly much older, preserved through oral tradition from Sumerian originals. The Atrahasis contains both a creation myth and the earliest known version of the flood story, dating the biblical Noah by 1,000 years. You pick up a translation of this text, and you begin to read. The opening lines are stark. When the gods were man, they did forced labour, they bore drudgery. Great indeed was the drudgery of the gods, the forced labour was heavy, the misery too much. This is not how creation myths usually begin. This is how labour union, grievances begin. The story continues. In the beginning, before humanity existed, the universe was divided among the great gods. Anu took the heavens, Enlil claimed earth and air, Enki was given the Abzu, the freshwater ocean beneath the ground. But the actual work of shaping this new world, digging the rivers, building the mountains, creating the infrastructure of existence, that brutal labour fell to the lesser gods, the Igigi. The Igigi gods dug the Tigris River and the Euphrates thereafter. They opened springs from the depths. For 40 years, the text says, they toiled. They dug canals, they hauled earth, they built an irrigation system that would make the land habitable. And then they snapped. After 40 years, too much forced labour they bore night and day. They were complaining, denouncing, muttering down in the ditch. Let us face up to our foreman, the prefect, he must take off our heavy burden upon us. The Igigi gods went on strike. They burned their tools, marched on Enlil's house, and surrounded his temple in the middle of the night, demanding justice. This is a divine workers' revolt. Enlil, furious and terrified, wants to crush the rebellion with violence. But a different solution is proposed. By Enki, of course, the clever one, the problem solver. The text records his suggestion to the Council of the Gods. Enki, who often takes the side of mankind, intervenes. He provides a solution to the crisis. Humans should be created to do the work instead. Why punish loyal servants when you can simply invent a new species to do the work? Create a primitive worker, a being intelligent enough to follow orders and use tools, but not so intelligent as to rebel, an organic machine built for a single purpose, to replace the striking gods and bear their burden forever. The council agrees, but how does one create a new form of life? The Atrahasis is disturbingly specific about the process. It reads less like a myth and more like a technical manual. First, they need raw materials, clay from the Abzu, the purest earth mixed with the waters of creation. But clay alone is not enough. The new creature needs more than form. It needs essence. The gods decide that a god must be sacrificed, his life force used to animate the clay and give the new creature intelligence. The god chosen is Wi-Ilu, also called Geshtu, described as a god who had intelligence. His blood, his spirit, his divine spark will be mixed with the clay. 'Tis a chilling detail. To create workers, you must kill one of your own. To give humans intelligence, a god must die. The ritual is performed. The goddess Ninti, the birth goddess also known as Ninta or Mami, takes the prepared mixture, this blend of earth and divine essence, and divides it into 14 portions. 7 are used to gestate males and 7 to gestate females, implanted into the wombs of 14 birth goddesses who act as surrogate mothers. After a specified gestation period, the first humans are born. The Lulu, the mixed ones. The word itself is telling. Not created in the image of the gods, but mixed, hybrid, something between the divine and the earthly. Something less than the gods, but more than the animals. Just enough intelligence to be useful. Just enough strength to work. This was the birth of Homo sapiens according to the oldest written account of human creation. The newly created humans are given a clear purpose. They are to take over the labour that the Igigi gods had abandoned. They dig canals, they work the fields, they serve in the temples, they provide food and offerings to keep the gods fed and content. And for a time the system works. The gods are pleased. The Igigi are freed from their toil. Humanity multiplies and spreads across the land, doing exactly what they were designed to do. But then a new problem emerges. Humans are too successful. They reproduce too quickly. Their numbers grow exponentially, and all that life creates noise. Constant, endless, unbearable noise. Enlil, the commander, the one who values order above all else, is kept awake by the clamour of humanity. The text says he cannot rest. The sound of human civilization, our cities, our markets, our laughter and tears, becomes an irritant to the divine. After centuries of enduring this, Enlil makes a decision. The experiment has failed. Humanity must be eliminated. He does not use a sword or a plague at first. He tries subtler methods. He sends drought, then famine, then disease, attempting to reduce human numbers without completely wiping them out. But every time Enki intervenes, the clever god, the creator, finds loopholes, whispers warnings to his favourite humans, teaches them how to survive. He releases fish into the rivers to feed them during famine. He instructs them on which gods to pray to for relief from specific disasters. Finally, Enlil has enough. He will use the ultimate weapon, a flood, a total reset, and this time he binds the other gods with an oath. They swear to keep the plan secret from humanity. No warnings, no exceptions. The Anunnaki watch as the sky darkens and the rains begin. Even they are terrified by what they have unleashed. The gods themselves retreat to the highest heaven and cower like dogs, watching the world they created be annihilated. But Enki finds his loophole again. He cannot break his oath by speaking directly to a human, so he goes to the reed hut of a man named Atrahasis, meaning exceedingly wise, and he speaks to the wall. "Reed wall," he says, as if talking to himself. "Reed wall, listen. Tear down your house and build a boat. This is divine plausible deniability at its finest." Atrahasis, listening from inside, understands. He builds a massive vessel sealed with bitumen and loads it with his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. The flood comes. For 6 days and 7 nights the world drowns. When the waters finally recede, Atrahasis opens his ark and makes a sacrifice to the gods. The aroma of the roasted meat rises to the heavens, and the starving gods, who have had no offerings for a week, gather around the smoke like flies. They realize with horror what they have lost. Without humans, there are no offerings. Without offerings, the gods go hungry, they need us. Enlil is furious that anyone survived, but Enki argues passionately. Life has been preserved. The system works. Let it continue. So a compromise is reached. From now on, all people must eventually die. Nintu, the birth goddess, is instructed to arrange that 1/3 of pregnancies will not succeed, and various classes of priestesses who will remain childless are instituted to keep the population in check. Humanity will be allowed to continue, but under new management. Shorter lifespans, built-in population control, a permanent reminder that we exist at the pleasure of our makers. This is the Sumerian account of human creation. Not a story of love, but of utility. Not a tale of divine breath given to clay in a garden, but of genetic engineering performed by exhausted managers seeking a cheaper workforce. It is a story that mainstream scholars understand as mythology, as ancient humanity's attempt to make sense of their relationship with the divine and the harsh realities of agricultural labour. It is allegory, they say, not history. A way of encoding the transition from nomadic life to settled civilization, the birth of social hierarchy, the creation of the concept of destiny and fate controlled by forces beyond mortal understanding. But to truly grasp the weight of this story, you must understand the world in which it was told. You must walk the streets of ancient Ur, feel the sun on your face as it beats down on mud brick walls painted white to reflect the heat. You must hear the sounds of a Sumerian city at the height of its power, around 2100 BCE, when King Ur-Nammu ruled, and the ziggurat rose like a mountain from the plain. The city sprawls before you, covering nearly 6 square kilometres, home to perhaps 65,000 souls. The streets are narrow, winding, unpaved. They were not designed for carts, but for feet and the occasional donkey laden with goods. The houses press close together, their walls touching, creating a maze of passages that provide shade from the relentless sun. You pass a workshop where craftsmen are making cylinder seals, those small tubes of stone carved with intricate scenes that, when rolled across wet clay, leave an impression serving as a signature, a mark of ownership, a seal of authority. The carver works with copper tools, his hands steady despite decades of repetitive motion. The seal he is creating shows a worshipper standing before a seated deity, hands raised in supplication. This is not art for art's sake. This is commerce. This is law. This is power made tangible. Every contract, every transaction, every official document in this city will be sealed with such an impression, binding the parties to their word under the watchful eyes of the gods. Further down the street, you smell the unmistakable scent of a bakery. Bread is the staff of life here, made from barley more often than wheat, ground into flour and baked in large communal ovens. The Sumerians invented the plough, which allowed them to cultivate vast fields of grain in the fertile alluvial soil. But that grain does not belong to the farmers who grow it. It belongs to the temple, to the palace, to the gods and their earthly representatives. The farmers work the land, harvest the grain, and deliver it as tribute. In return, they receive rations measured out in those standardized beveled rim bowls that archaeologists find by the thousands. The system is efficient. The system is total. The system is exactly what the creation myth describes. You work, you are fed, you serve. You arrive at the base of the Great Ziggurat and the scale is overwhelming. The structure rises in 3 massive terraces, each one smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pyramid that dominates the skyline. The base measures approximately 64 by 46 metres, and the structure stands at least 30 metres high, perhaps higher when it was intact. The outer walls are made of fired brick, each one stamped with the name of Ur-Nammu, declaring for eternity that he built this house for the moon god Nana. The staircases that lead to the summit are steep, designed to be climbed in procession by priests and perhaps by the king himself during important festivals. But you, an ordinary citizen, cannot ascend, you are not permitted. The top of the ziggurat, where the shrine of Nana stands gleaming white against the blue sky, is forbidden territory. This physical barrier is a perfect metaphor for the social structure of Sumer. At the top, quite literally, are the gods and their priests. These men, and they are almost exclusively men, control access to the divine. They interpret omens, perform sacrifices, maintain the statues of the gods, and ensure that the complex rituals are performed correctly. They are also the educated class. They can read and write cuneiform, a skill that takes years to master. There are hundreds of different symbols to memorize, and the script can be maddeningly complex, using the same sign to represent different sounds or ideas depending on context. This literacy gives the priests enormous power. They keep the records, they write the laws, they control the flow of information. Below the priests in the social hierarchy are the scribes, the administrators, the skilled craftsmen, the merchants. These are the people who make the city function, who keep the accounts, who build the buildings, who trade with distant lands bringing in copper from Oman, tin from Afghanistan, lapis lazuli from the mountains of what is now Pakistan. Sumerian trade networks stretched for thousands of kilometers, creating connections between the Mediterranean and the Indus Valley. The Sumerians were not isolated. They were cosmopolitan, aware of other peoples, other languages, other ways of organising the world. And at the bottom of the social pyramid are the vast majority. The farmers, the labourers, the people whose names are not recorded in the king lists but whose labour made everything possible. They are the ones who dig the canals that bring water from the rivers to the fields. They are the ones who haul the mud bricks that build the walls, the houses, the temples. They are the ones who work from sunrise to sunset in the fields, in the workshops, in the service of the gods and the king. The Atrahasis speaks directly to their experience. You were made to work. You exist to serve. And if you complain too loudly, if you make too much noise, the gods might decide you are more trouble than you are worth. The Sumerian economy was essentially a redistributive system centered on the temple and palace. Farmers brought their grain to the temple, where it was stored in massive granaries. Craftsmen brought their goods. Shepherds brought their wool and meat. The priests and administrators recorded everything on clay tablets, tracking inputs and outputs with meticulous precision. Then the temple redistributed these resources as rations to workers, as payments to craftsmen, as gifts to allies, as offerings to other gods. This system required an enormous bureaucracy. Thousands of scribes working in the temple complexes, their tablets piling up year after year. When archaeologists excavate Sumerian sites, they find these administrative archives by the thousands, mundane records of sheep counted, grain measured, workers paid. These are the bones of the system the myths describe. Within this social structure, the concept of me, those divine decrees or principles that govern civilization, becomes crucial. The me were not abstract laws, but were understood as tangible objects, possibly tablets or other sacred items, that contained the fundamental knowledge and authority needed to make civilization function. There were me for kingship, for priesthood, for warfare, for agriculture, for writing, for metalwork, for beer brewing, for sexual intercourse, for music, for law. The god Enki was the original guardian of most of these me, keeping them in his temple in Eridu, the oldest of the Sumerian cities, the place where civilization was said to have begun. One of the most revealing myths about the me is the story of how the goddess Inanna, patron of Uruk, travelled to Enki's temple in Eridu and tricked him into giving her over 100 of the me. The story goes that Inanna arrived at Eridu and Enki, pleased to see the beautiful young goddess, threw a feast in her honour. As the beer flowed, Enki became increasingly generous, offering Inanna gift after gift of the sacred me. She accepted each one, loading them onto her boat of heaven. The next morning, Enki woke with a terrible hangover and realised what he had done. He sent his servants to chase after Inanna and retrieve the Emmi, but she had already escaped back to Uruk, where the Emmi were installed in her temple, elevating Uruk to become the preeminent city of Sumer. This myth is often read as a political charter, explaining and justifying how Uruk superseded Eridu as the centre of Sumerian civilization. But it also reveals something important about how the Sumerians understood knowledge and power. The me are transferable. They can be stolen. Civilization is not inevitable or natural. It is built on specific knowledge and specific authority, and whoever controls that knowledge controls society. When Inanna brings the me to Uruk, she is not just bringing abstract concepts. She is bringing the actual tools of governance, the blueprints for social organisation, the instruction manuals for creating and maintaining a complex urban civilization. This is why the Atrahasis describes the creation of humans in such technical detail. The Sumerians understood creation as a form of technology, a deliberate process with specific inputs and outputs, not a miracle or a mystery. The daily religious life of a Sumerian was permeated with the awareness of divine presence. The gods were not distant or abstract. They were understood to literally inhabit their statues in the temples, and those statues required constant care. Every day, priests would wake the god by opening the temple doors to let in the first light of dawn. They would wash the statue, dress it in fine garments, offer it food and drink, place before it the tribute brought by the faithful. The god consumed the essence of these offerings, and then the physical food would be redistributed to the priests and temple workers. This is why the Atrahasis describes the gods gathering like flies around the sacrifice after the flood. Without humans to make offerings, the gods go hungry. It is a remarkable inversion of the typical divine-human relationship. We need them, yes, but they also need us. We are symbiotic, locked together, in a system where neither can function without the other. This mutual dependence is reflected in another important text, the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. While this text is later than the Sumerian period, dating to around 1100 BCE, it draws heavily on older Sumerian traditions and provides important context for understanding how these ideas evolved. The Enuma Elish is most famous for its cosmic battle between the god Marduk and the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat. But the part relevant to our discussion comes at the end, after Marduk has slain Tiamat, created the world from her corpse and established order in the cosmos. The gods are celebrating Marduk's victory when they decide that they need something to relieve them of their labours. Marduk orders the creation of humanity from the blood of Tiamat's consort Kingu, who had led her army. Humanity is made from the blood of a rebel god, which gives us a violent, potentially rebellious nature, but we are created for a specific purpose. The text states it explicitly. Let him be burdened with the toil of the gods that they might freely breathe. The parallel to the Atrahasis is clear. In both texts, humanity is created to perform labour that the gods do not want to do themselves. The difference is that in the Atrahasis, it is the lesser Igigi gods who revolt and are replaced by humans. In the Enuma Elish, it is the blood of a defeated rebel that provides the raw material for human creation. Both versions encode the same essential truth about the Mesopotamian worldview. We exist to serve. Our intelligence is not a gift, but a feature, designed to make us useful, and any rebellion against this order is cosmic treason, a violation of the fundamental structure of reality itself. Living under this worldview must have been psychologically complex. On one hand, it provided meaning and structure. Your labour was not meaningless drudgery, it was cosmic service. You were feeding the gods, maintaining the temples, upholding the order of creation itself. Your work mattered in the most fundamental sense. On the other hand, it was a prison, with walls built from ideology rather than stone. You could not question the system without questioning the gods themselves. You could not organise for better conditions without invoking divine wrath. The myth made the social structure seem natural, inevitable, ordained by forces beyond human control. This is precisely what makes it such an effective tool of social control, and precisely why it feels so uncomfortable to modern ears. Yet within this system, there were cracks, moments of subversion and questioning that suggest the Sumerians were not simple believers but complex, people capable of doubt. The Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the most famous piece of Sumerian literature, is essentially a story about a man who refuses to accept the human condition. Gilgamesh is 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a demigod king of Uruk who rules with terrible power until he meets Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods to be his equal. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh is shattered by grief and terror at his own mortality. He embarks on a desperate quest to find Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, who was granted immortality after surviving the flood. Gilgamesh's journey takes him to the ends of the earth, and when he finally finds Utnapishtim, the old man tells him the bitter truth. Immortality was a one-time gift given under unique circumstances that will never be repeated. Gilgamesh is offered a plant that restores youth but not immortality, and even that is stolen by a snake before he can use it. He returns to Uruk having gained nothing but the wisdom that death is inevitable, that the human condition cannot be escaped, that the only immortality available is through the works we leave behind. This story is a profound meditation on mortality, but it is also a subtle critique of the system described in the Atrahasis. Gilgamesh is not content to simply accept his role. He questions, he rebels, he demands answers from the gods and from fate itself, and while he ultimately fails to achieve his goal, his struggle is treated as noble rather than blasphemous. The text does not punish him for his questioning, it honours him for it, presenting him as the greatest of kings precisely because he had the courage to seek what could not be found. This suggests that even in a society built on the principle that humans exist to serve the gods, there was space for doubt, for questioning, for the very human impulse to rage against the dying of the light. But there is one man who looked at these texts and saw something else entirely. A man who read the cuneiform not as metaphor but as literal historical record. A man whose interpretation would ignite a global phenomenon that persists to this day. His name was Zecharia Sitchin, and in 1976 he published a book called The 12th Planet that would change everything. Zecharia Sitchin was born in Baku, Azerbaijan in 1920 and raised in British Mandate Palestine. He was educated in London and became fluent in modern and ancient Hebrew, as well as other Semitic and European languages. He was not a professionally trained archaeologist or Assyriologist. His formal education was in economics and journalism, but he taught himself to read Sumerian cuneiform, or so he claimed, and he spent 30 years researching ancient Near Eastern texts. His first book, The 12th Planet, proposed a radical reinterpretation. The Anunnaki were not gods at all, but extraterrestrial visitors from a hidden planet called Nibiru. Sitchin's theory is sweeping, detailed, and impossible to summarise briefly, but here are its core claims. There is an undiscovered planet beyond Neptune that follows a long, highly elliptical orbit around our Sun, taking approximately 300 years to complete one revolution. This planet, which he identified with the Babylonian name Nibiru, is home to an advanced humanoid species, the Anunnaki. Around 450,000 years ago, according to Sitchin, the Anunnaki faced an environmental crisis on their home world. Their atmosphere was failing, eroding into space, and the only solution was to suspend fine particles of gold in their stratosphere to create a reflective shield. The problem was Nibiru lacked sufficient gold. But Earth, they discovered, was rich in the precious metal. So they came here. They established mining operations, primarily in southeastern Africa, where the oldest gold mines in human history have been found, and began extracting gold on an industrial scale. Sitchin pointed to ancient mines in South Africa that show evidence of excavation dating back tens of thousands of years, far earlier than mainstream archaeology says humans should have been capable of such organised mining. He argued these were Anunnaki mines, worked first by the aliens themselves and then by their human creations. For thousands of years the Anunnaki miners toiled, but the work was back-breaking, and eventually, around 300,000 years ago, they rebelled. The rank-and-file workers, the Agigi in Sitchin's telling, demanded relief. The solution proposed by their chief scientist Enki was audacious. They would create a new worker species by genetically upgrading a primitive hominid already living on Earth, Homo erectus. Sitchin claimed to have found detailed descriptions of this genetic engineering process in the Sumerian texts. He interpreted passages about mixing clay with the blood of gods as descriptions of in vitro fertilization and genetic manipulation. He pointed to cylinder seals that appeared to show laboratory scenes, medical procedures, and what he claimed were depictions of the double helix structure of DNA. One particular cylinder seal, VA243, became central to his argument. This seal, housed in the Berlin Museum, shows a star surrounded by 11 small globes. Sitchin argued this was a depiction of our solar system with the sun at the centre, the 9 known planets, plus the moon, plus the mysterious 12th body Nibiru. He claimed this proved the Sumerians had astronomical knowledge they could not have possessed without help from the Anunnaki, who could see the entire solar system from their vantage point in space. Using advanced knowledge of genetics, the Anunnaki would combine their own DNA with that of the native hominid, creating a hybrid being, Homo sapiens, designed specifically to be intelligent enough to mine gold but docile enough not to challenge their authority. The experiments were not immediately successful. Sitchin claimed the texts described multiple attempts, trial and error, creating beings with various deformities before finally achieving the desired result, the Adamu, the first humans. These initial humans, Sitchin argued, were sterile, like mules, unable to reproduce on their own. But then came a crucial intervention. Enki, sympathizing with his creation, gave humans the ability to procreate independently. This, Sitchin said, was the true meaning of the biblical story of the Garden of Eden. The Tree of Knowledge was not about moral knowledge of good and evil, but about sexual reproduction and self-determination. The serpent was Enki, the fruit was genetic modification, and humanity's expulsion from the garden was the moment we went from being directly controlled biological tools to semi-independent, beings capable of self-reproduction. The biblical story of Adam and Eve, Sitchin argued, was a distorted cultural memory of this genetic engineering project. Adam comes from the Sumerian Adamu, meaning one made from earth. Eve, Hawa, in Hebrew meaning life-giver, corresponds to Ninti, whose name means lady who gives life. The Garden of Eden was a laboratory, an enclosure where the genetic experiments took place. The Tree of Knowledge was the moment humans gained self-awareness beyond their programming. The serpent was Enki, the rebellious scientist who sympathized with his creation and wanted to give humans more than they were designed for, making him the villain in the eyes of Enlil, but the hero from humanity's perspective. Sitchin's interpretation extended to explaining virtually every aspect of ancient Sumerian culture through this extraterrestrial lens. The Sumerian king list, with its impossibly long reigns for pre-flood monarchs, one king reigning for 28,800 years, another for 36,000 years, made sense if you understood that those early rulers were not fully human, but Anunnaki or Anunnaki human hybrids with vastly extended lifespans. Sitchin argued that the Anunnaki experienced time differently, because their planet's year was 300 Earth years long. When the texts say a king reigned for 28,800 years, they meant 8 Nibiru years, which seems like a more reasonable reign length from the Anunnaki perspective. What historians dismissed as mythological exaggeration or symbolic numbers representing divine authority, Sitchin read as literal fact recorded in a different timescale. The ziggurat temples were not symbolic mountains, but actual landing platforms for the Anunnaki spacecraft. The Mi, those divine decrees, were not abstract principles, but technological devices, possibly computers or data storage units containing the knowledge needed to run a civilization. The various gods with their specific domains and attributes were not personifications of natural forces, but actual individual Anunnaki with different roles and responsibilities in the colonial administration. Anu was the supreme commander on a Nibiru. Enlil was the operational commander on Earth. Enki was the chief scientist, and Ninhursag was the chief medical officer specializing in genetics. Inanna, also called Ishtar, was a young Anunnaki pilot known for her fierce independence and sexual appetite, traits that got her into constant trouble with the male hierarchy. The stories of gods warring with each other, forming alliances, betraying one another, were not myths but actual political conflicts between different factions of the Anunnaki ruling class. Sitchin's work is filled with such reinterpretations. He looked at the ancient Mesopotamian flood story and saw not a divine punishment but a natural disaster that the Anunnaki knew was coming but chose not to warn humans about. He argued that Nibiru's periodic passage through the inner solar system causes gravitational disruptions that can trigger earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and polar ice sheet collapses. Around 13,000 years ago, Nibiru's approach caused the Antarctic ice sheet to slip into the ocean, creating the global flood recorded in myths worldwide. Enlil, who had grown tired of humanity's noise and rebellion, saw this as an opportunity to eliminate the human problem entirely. He forced the other Anunnaki to swear an oath not to warn humans. But Enki, true to form, found a way around the oath and warned his favourite human, Zeusudra. also known as Utnapishtim or Noah, enabling him to build an ark and survive. After the flood, when the Anunnaki realised they had nearly destroyed their entire workforce, they decided to give humans more autonomy. They taught us agriculture, animal domestication, writing, mathematics, and law, kick-starting what we call civilization. The sudden appearance of advanced civilization in Sumer around 3500–3000 BCE, with no apparent precursors, was Sitchin's smoking gun. How could people go from primitive hunter-gatherers to sophisticated urban dwellers with writing, mathematics, and monumental architecture in such a short time? The answer, he claimed, was that they didn't develop it. They were taught it by the returning Anunnaki after the flood. Sitchin even provided a timeline for the Anunnaki presence on Earth. He claimed they first arrived 450,000 years ago, created humans about 300,000 years ago, and continued to rule directly through Anunnaki-human hybrid kings until the flood around 13,000 years ago. After the flood, they established a new system where human kings ruled as intermediaries, receiving instructions and legitimacy from the gods. This divine right of kings was not a metaphorical concept, but a literal political structure, where the Anunnaki gave authority to specific human bloodlines descended from their own hybrid offspring. The various ancient dynasties, Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian kings were all part of this bloodline, maintaining genetic connections to the Anunnaki and serving as their administrators on Earth. The most recent major Anunnaki intervention, according to Sitchin's timeline, occurred around 224 BCE, when he claimed a nuclear war broke out between rival Anunnaki factions. This war, he argued, led to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which he identified not as cities of sin but as Anunnaki spaceports, and the mysterious sudden collapse of the Akkadian Empire due to nuclear fallout. The evil wind described in ancient Sumerian laments about the destruction of Ur was not a plague or a dust storm, but radioactive fallout from nuclear weapons. After this catastrophe, the Anunnaki largely withdrew from direct involvement in human affairs, though Sitchin believed they continued to monitor us from a distance and might return when Nibiru next passes through the inner solar system. Sitchin's books have sold millions of copies worldwide and been translated into more than 25 languages. He published 13 books into total, 7 in his Earth Chronicles series and 6 companion volumes. The 12th planet was followed by The Stairway to Heaven, The Wars of Gods and Men, The Lost Realms, When Time Began, The Cosmic Code, and The End of Days. Each book expanded his thesis, applying it to different regions and time periods, connecting Egyptian, Hindu, Mesoamerican, and other mythologies into a single unified narrative of human-alien contact. He transformed the Anunnaki from obscure Mesopotamian deities into household names, symbols of a hidden cosmic history where humanity's origins lie not in Africa or evolution, but in a laboratory on an alien planet. To believers, Sitchin was a visionary, one of the few people with the courage and skill to decode what the ancients were really saying. He appeared on numerous radio and television programs, gave lectures around the world, and inspired countless other researchers to pursue similar lines of investigation. His influence extends far beyond his own books. The entire modern ancient astronaut movement, popularized by the History Channel's Ancient Aliens series, stands on foundations Sitchin built. The show features his theories prominently, and many of its regular contributors explicitly cite Sitchin as a major influence on their work. His ideas have been incorporated into New Age belief systems, UFO religions like Raelism, and various conspiracy theories about secret government knowledge of extraterrestrial contact. His books have also influenced popular culture more broadly. The 1994 film Stargate, directed by Roland Emmerich, drew conceptual inspiration from Sitchin's ideas about ancient Egypt and alien visitors. The 2011 film Cowboys and Aliens was explicitly inspired by Sitchin's conceptualization of the Anunnaki as gold-mining aliens. Various video games have incorporated his mythology, including The Conduit, which features an alien species based on Sitchin's descriptions. Countless novels, comic books, and web series have adapted his narrative framework. Whether as literal truth or as compelling science fiction, Sitchin's vision has permeated modern culture in ways that go far beyond academic debate. Sitchin's books have sold millions of copies worldwide and been translated into more than 25 languages. The 12th planet became a cultural phenomenon, spawning an entire industry of ancient astronaut theory. His ideas have influenced countless books, documentaries, television shows, and an entire generation of alternative researchers. He transformed the Anunnaki from obscure Mesopotamian deities into household names, symbols of a hidden cosmic history where humanity's origins lie not in Africa or evolution, but in a laboratory on an alien planet. To believers, Sitchin was a visionary, one of the few people with the courage and skill to decode what the ancients were really saying. To critics, he was something else entirely, a skilled storyteller who fundamentally misunderstood, mistranslated, and misrepresented the texts he claimed to have mastered. The academic response to Sitchin's work was swift and devastating. His ideas have been resoundingly rejected by scientists, academics, historians, including Sumerologists, Orientalists, and Assyriologists, who dismiss his work as pseudoscience and pseudo-history. His work has been criticized for flawed methodology, ignoring archaeological and historical evidence, and mistranslations of ancient texts, as well as for incorrect astronomical and scientific claims. Let us look at the specifics. Sitchin's translation of Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came is linguistically inaccurate. The correct translation is princely blood or seed of Anu. His identification of Nibiru as a planet is Sitchin's invention. In Mesopotamian astronomy, Nibiru is a celestial point, a crossing place, not a planet. Scholars of cuneiform astronomy have not been able to determine with certainty what exactly Nibiru is, but one thing is certain from the texts. Nibiru is never identified as a planet. In ancient astronomical texts, Nibiru refers to Jupiter and sometimes Mercury, and it describes a crossing point in the sky, not a rogue world from deep space. Critics point out that Sitchin carefully selects evidence that matches his preconceived notions while ignoring evidence that contradicts him. For example, he presents the Atrahasis as proof that the gods created humans as slave labourers, which the text does say. But he ignores the fact that there are at least 4 different Sumerian narratives explaining the origin of man, not one coherent belief system, and he imposes modern technological language onto descriptions that are clearly mythological and symbolic. When the text describes the goddess Ninti mixing clay with divine blood, Sitchin translates this as genetic engineering and in vitro fertilization. When it describes gods wearing radiant garments, he sees spacesuits. When it mentions celestial boats, he sees rockets. One scholar asked pointedly, if these beings are advanced enough to cross interstellar space, why would they need anything as primitive as rockets? Why not wormholes, anti-gravity, or black hole bounce rematerializations? Sitchin, the critic argues, falls into crude literalism, turning ancient Sumer into an 50s science fiction movie set. Furthermore, the astronomical claims do not hold up to scrutiny. The Sumerians knew of 5 planets, not 12 as Sitchin claimed. There is no evidence in the ancient texts for a massive planet with a 300-600-year orbit. Such an object would create massive, easily detectable gravitational perturbations in the orbits of our known planets. None have been observed. The orbit Sitchin describes is dynamically unstable and astronomically implausible. Yet despite the overwhelming academic rejection, Sitchin's narrative thrives. Why? Because it offers something that dry scholarship cannot. It offers certainty, drama, and a cosmic origin story that feels simultaneously ancient and futuristic. It taps into a deep human need to believe that we are special, that we are connected to something greater, that our existence has an external purpose, even if that purpose is disturbing. And it feeds into a growing distrust of academic authority, the sense that mainstream science is either too blind or too complicit to see the truth hidden in plain sight. The Anunnaki have become a modern myth, as powerful and pervasive as the original Sumerian stories, but now filtered through the lens of UFOs, government conspiracies, and the search for extraterrestrial life. But whether you believe Sitchin or reject him entirely, one new fact remains: the Sumerian texts themselves exist. They are real, and they do say something profound about how the ancient world understood creation, labour, and the relationship between gods and humans. So what do mainstream scholars actually make of these texts? How do they interpret the story of humanity being created to serve the gods? The academic consensus is clear. The Anunnaki were the principal deities of the Mesopotamian pantheon, the great gods descended from An, the sky god, who controlled the fates of humanity. Their main function in early mythology was to decide the fates of human beings. The term Anunnaki is not a name for a specific group so much as a designation for the highest tier of the divine hierarchy. In the Sumerian textual corpus, Anunnaki describes the highest gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon, but it can also be used to indicate the pantheon of a particular city or city-state. It is not clear how many gods and which particular gods this term includes. One text speaks of the 50 Anunnaki of Eridu. After the Old Babylonian period, the meaning of Anunnaki changed. It was then used to describe the gods of the netherworld, in opposition to the term Igigi, which came to mean the gods of heaven. This shift reflects the evolution of Mesopotamian religious thought over thousands of years, not a literal account of two classes of aliens. The creation story in the Atrahasis is understood by scholars as an etiological myth, a story that explains the origin of something, in this case the origin of humanity, and the reason for human suffering and mortality. The myth begins by explaining how the lesser gods tired of their labours on the canals and farms of Mesopotamia and instigated a rebellion. This is a powerful allegory for the transition from a pre-agricultural society to a settled farming civilization, where labour became organised, hierarchical, and often brutal. The decision to create humanity to take over this labour reflects the ancient Mesopotamian worldview that human beings exist to serve the gods. This is not unique to Mesopotamia. Many ancient cultures saw their relationship with the divine in transactional terms. Humans provided worship, sacrifices, and offerings, and in return the gods provided protection, fertility, and prosperity. The Atrahasis encodes this relationship in a narrative form. We are the workforce. The temples are the factories. The priests are the managers, and the gods are the owners who demand tribute. The flood story, which forms the second major part of the Atrahasis, is understood as a myth addressing the problem of human suffering and divine justice. Why do disasters strike? Why do populations face famine and plague? The myth provides an answer. The gods are capricious, but some, like Enki, can be appealed to for mercy. The character of Atrahasis, the exceedingly wise one, becomes the model for righteous humanity, the person who listens to divine warnings and survives catastrophe through obedience and clever preparation. This story was so powerful that it was adapted and retold in multiple versions across the ancient Near East, including the biblical story of Noah, preserving the core message that humanity survives by the grace of the gods. Scholars also emphasize that to read these texts literally, as Sitchin did, is to strip them of their rich symbolic and theological meaning. The mixing of clay with divine blood is not a description of genetic engineering. It is a powerful metaphor for the dual nature of humanity, earthy and mortal like clay, but possessing a spark of the divine, the breath of life that separates us from animals. The sacrifice of the god Geshtu-i symbolizes that creation requires loss, that consciousness itself comes at a cost. These are profound philosophical ideas expressed in mythological language, not technical manuals. Yet the question remains, why does this story resonate so powerfully, even in its misunderstood form? What is it about the idea that we were created to serve that strikes such a deep chord? Perhaps because it taps into a universal human anxiety, the fear that our existence has no inherent meaning, that we are not the centre of cosmic attention but merely cogs in a machine we did not build and do not control. The modern world, with its industrial labour, its corporate hierarchies, its feeling of powerlessness in the face of vast systems, mirrors the ancient Mesopotamian worldview more than we might like to admit. We still work to serve powers greater than ourselves. We still provide tribute in the form of taxes, labour, and obedience. We still wonder if those in power truly have our best interests at heart, or see us merely as resources to be exploited. The Sumerian texts, whether read as mythology or misread as history, hold up a mirror. And what we see reflected is uncomfortable. The idea that we were designed, that our intelligence is not a gift, but a feature added for utility, that even our suffering is built into the system as population control, these are not comforting thoughts, but they are recognizable thoughts. They speak to a feeling many people have that something about our existence is not quite right, that we were meant for something more than endless toil, but have been trapped in a system that cannot be escaped. This is why the ancient astronaut theory, despite its academic rejection, will never truly die. It gives form to a formless anxiety. It provides an external enemy, the Anunnaki, the elite, the controllers, and it promises that understanding our true origins might be the key to liberation. If we were made, the logic goes, we can unmake ourselves. If our DNA was engineered, we can engineer it again. If we are slaves, we can become free. The myth evolves to meet the needs of each generation, but there is another layer to this story that we must explore. The physical structures that the Sumerians built to house their gods. The massive terraced pyramids called ziggurats that still dot the landscape of Iraq and Iran, rising from the dust like monuments to an alien mindset. What were these structures? What purpose did they serve? And do they support the idea of gods descending from the sky? Or do they reveal a more human truth? You find yourself standing before one of these ancient structures. The ziggurat of Ur, partially restored, its mud brick terraces climbing toward the sky. The Uruk ziggurat rose 40 feet above the surrounding plains and was topped by a shrine known as the White Temple, reached by processional stairs on the side of the structure. The Uruk ziggurat was built of rammed earth and sun-dried mud brick with the topped surface covered in bitumen, and then more brick, providing waterproofing and a secure foundation for the White Temple. This was not a tomb like the Egyptian pyramids. This was something else. The Mesopotamian ziggurats were not places for public worship or ceremonies. They were believed to be dwelling places for the gods, and each city had its own patron god. Only priests were permitted on the ziggurat or in the rooms at its base, and it was their responsibility to care for the gods and attend to their needs. The word ziggurat comes from the Akkadian zikkuratum, derived from zakaram meaning to protrude or to build high. The ziggurat itself is the base on which the temple is set. Its purpose is to get the temple closer to the heavens and provide access from the ground to it via steps. The Mesopotamians believed that these pyramid temples connected heaven and earth. The ziggurat at Babylon was known as Etemenanki, which means house of the foundation of heaven and earth in Sumerian. This structure became legendary, possibly inspiring the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, and it symbolized humanity's attempt to reach the realm of the divine. The design was practical yet symbolic, built with a core of sun-baked bricks and an exterior of kiln-fired bricks, often glazed in different colours that may have had astrological significance, each step slightly smaller than the one below, creating the distinctive terraced silhouette. Ziggurats had no internal chambers and were usually square or rectangular, averaging either 170 feet square or 125 by 170 feet at the base. The purpose, according to mainstream archaeology, was clear. Ziggurats represented the mountains and summits where the homes of the gods were located. The ziggurat of the god Enlil in the city of Nibiru was known as the House of the Mountain, Mountain of the Storm, and bond between heaven and earth. The Mesopotamians, living on flat alluvial plains, built artificial mountains to recreate the sacred high places where divinity dwelt. The ziggurat was an artificial mountain raised for the worship of the gods to elevate the priest toward heaven. But to alternative theorists, these structures look like something else entirely. Landing platforms, observation decks, communication arrays, the flat tops, the massive staircases, the restricted access, all suggest a utilitarian function. If beings were descending from the sky, where better to receive them than atop a massive elevated platform visible for miles in every direction? The biblical story of the Tower of Babel adds to this interpretation. In Genesis, humanity attempts to build a tower reaching to heaven, and God, threatened by this, scatters them and confuses their languages. If the gods were extraterrestrials, this story could be read as a prohibition against humans developing the technology to reach them, a deliberate sabotage of human progress to maintain control. Yet, the archaeological evidence tells a more mundane story. Ziggurats were the centre of non-religious activities as well. Priests in the ancient Near East were the most educated members of society, serving as physicians, scientists, historians, and scribes. Mesopotamian temple complexes served as scribal schools and astronomical observatories. The ziggurats were administrative centres, economic hubs, and seats of political power as much as they were religious sites. The general public was only allowed access to the outer temple complex. Only the high priest could visit the very top of the structure. This restriction was about maintaining priestly authority and social hierarchy, not about hiding alien technology. The ziggurat, built at the centre of the city, symbolically and practically served as the community's heart while the palace was its head. The kingship and the temple complex worked together seamlessly as civil and spiritual authorities. Each city-state had its patron deity, and the ziggurat was that deity's earthly home. Sumerian society offered these gods gifts such as music, harvested produce and devotional statues to entice them to live in the temple. The priests performed daily rituals, preparing meals, dressing statues, and making offerings to keep the god fed and content. This was the cost of divine favour and protection. The ziggurats were engineering marvels, products of sophisticated mathematical understanding and organisational capability. They grew taller, longer and wider over time to reflect the grandeur of the city and the successful reign of its king. The great ziggurat of Ur, built by King Ur-Nammu around 2100 BCE, remains one of the best preserved examples. But they were not alien structures. They were profoundly human, built with human hands using human knowledge, driven by human ambition and human faith. Still, standing before these ancient monuments, it is easy to understand why they inspire such wild speculation. They feel too grand, too perfectly aligned, too intentional to be mere products of early civilization. They whisper of something more, and perhaps that is their true power. Not that they provide evidence of extraterrestrial contact, but that they demonstrate what humans are capable of when we organise around a shared vision, no matter how strange that vision might seem to modern eyes. The Sumerians built their ziggurats because they believed the gods lived in the sky and needed homes on earth. They worked their entire lives in service of these gods because they believed it was their purpose, the reason they existed. The texts say they were created for this. The texts say the gods made them to be workers. Whether that is myth or memory, metaphor or mistranslation, the result is the same. The Sumerians believed it, they lived it, and they wrote it down so that we, thousands of years later, would know. But what are we to do with this knowledge? How are we to reconcile the academic understanding of these texts as mythology with the persistent, powerful feeling that there is something more here, something hidden just beneath the surface? The answer may lie not in choosing between mythology and history, between Sitchin and the scholars, but in understanding what these stories reveal about the human condition regardless of their literal truth. The Sumerian creation myth is a story about power, about who has it, who wields it, and who suffers under it. It is a story about labour and class, about the many who work and the few who benefit. It is a story about intelligence as a curse as much as a blessing, about consciousness that allows us to question our place in the world, but offers no easy answers. These themes are eternal. They echo through every age. The ancient Sumerian king, watching thousands of labourers haul mud bricks to build his ziggurat, saw the same thing. A modern CEO sees looking at a factory floor. Human potential, human energy, human life transformed into productivity, into profit, into monuments that will outlast their builders. The genius of the Sumerian texts is that they make this relationship cosmic. They elevate it to the level of divine mandate. You were made for this. This is your purpose, this and be protected. Rebel and be destroyed. It is a powerful tool of social control, but it is also a powerful expression of existential truth. We are born into systems we did not choose. We work to survive. We create meaning in the spaces between our obligations, and we wonder always if there is something more. The question of whether the Anunnaki were gods or aliens may be the wrong question. The real question is what they represent. They represent the forces that shape our lives, the powers we cannot see but whose influence we feel constantly. Call them gods, call them aliens, call them the market, the state, the algorithm. The name changes, the dynamic does not. We are still creating value for entities that do not share it equitably. We are still wondering if our creators, however we define them, have our best interests at heart. Zecharia Sitchin's great insight was not that he correctly translated ancient texts. He did not. His great insight was recognizing that ancient mythology can be read as science fiction, and in doing so he made it relevant to a modern audience that had lost connection with the symbolic language of the past. He translated myth into a language we understand: technology, genetics, space travel, conspiracy. Whether his specific claims are true is almost beside the point. What matters is that he reminded us that ancient peoples were trying to answer the same questions we are. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Who is in control? The academic scholars who reject Sitchin are not wrong. Their translations are more accurate, their methodology is more sound, their conclusions are more probable, but they often miss what makes these myths so powerful and so persistent. The myths endure not because they are historically accurate, but because they are emotionally and psychologically true. The feeling that we were made to serve, the sense that our intelligence is both gift and trap, the fear that those in power see us as resources rather than as beings with inherent worth, these are real human experiences. The Sumerian texts gave form to these experiences 4,000 years ago, and they continue to resonate because the experiences themselves have not changed. So where does this leave us? Standing in that ancient library, holding a clay tablet covered in wedge marks, what truth do we take away? Perhaps the truth is this: the Sumerians were extraordinary. They built the first cities, invented writing, developed mathematics, created law, and produced literature that still speaks to us across the millennia. They did all of this without alien intervention. They did it because they were brilliant, curious, organised, and relentlessly creative. They were fully, completely human. But they also lived in a world of brutal hierarchy, where a small priestly class controlled the surplus produced by countless farmers and labourers. They lived with disease, famine, and the constant threat of war. They watched their children die. They worked until their bodies gave out, and they needed to make sense of all that suffering. They needed to believe that their labour had purpose, that their gods required it, that the cosmos itself was organised around their service. This belief made the suffering bearable. It gave structure to chaos. It promised that if they worked hard enough, made the right offerings, followed the correct rituals, they would be rewarded, if not in this life, then through the favour bestowed upon their city, their children, their legacy. The Atrahasis is not a happy story. Humanity is created as a replacement workforce, nearly destroyed in a flood for being too noisy, and then subjected to permanent mortality and suffering as a compromise solution. But it is an honest story. It reflects the harsh realities of ancient life and the desperate need to find meaning within those constraints. The flood story ends not with humanity triumphant, but with humanity surviving, barely, by the mercy of one sympathetic God. That is the condition of human existence. We survive, we endure. We find small mercies in a universe that is often indifferent and sometimes cruel. The modern fascination with the ancient astronaut theory is, at its heart, a continuation of this same search for meaning. We live in a world of staggering inequality, environmental crisis, and technological acceleration. We feel powerless in the face of systems too complex to understand and too entrenched to change. And so we look to the sky, just as the Sumerians did, and we ask if there is something out there that can explain why things are the way they are. If we could just uncover the truth about the Anunnaki, the theory goes, if we could just expose the conspiracy, if we could just contact the aliens, then everything would make sense. Then we would know our purpose. Then we would be free. But the truth, the uncomfortable truth, is that there is no secret knowledge that will save us. There are no aliens coming to liberate us or to enslave us. There are only humans, as we have always been, trying to make sense of our existence and trying to build something better despite the obstacles. The Sumerians created civilization not because gods told them to, but because they chose to. They organised their labour, shared their knowledge, and built monuments that defied the limitations of their technology. They were not slaves to alien masters. They were slaves, yes, but to their own kings, their own priests, their own systems of power. And within that oppression, they still found ways to create beauty, to tell stories, to ask questions, to dream. The clay tablets they left behind are not instruction manuals from space. They are messages from our ancestors. They are saying we were here, we lived, we suffered, we wondered about the gods, we tried to understand why things are the way they are. We wrote it down so you would remember. The tablets are a reminder that the struggle to find meaning, to question authority, to seek truth, is not new. It is ancient. It is human. If the Sumerian texts reveal anything, it is this. We have always been looking for someone to blame for our condition, some external force that explains why life is hard, why power is unequal, why suffering persists. The Sumerians blamed the gods. We blame aliens, or government, secret societies. But the real answer is simpler and more difficult. We create our own systems of oppression. We build our own ziggurats. We write our own myths to justify them. And we have the power to unmake them, not by discovering hidden truths from the sky, but by organising, by questioning, by refusing to accept that our only purpose is to serve. The Anunnaki, whether gods or aliens or symbols, are not coming back to save us or destroy us. We are on our own. We have always been on our own. The clay tablets, the ziggurats, the entire legacy of Sumer, it all speaks to one undeniable fact. Human beings, despite impossible odds, despite crushing labour, despite the belief that they existed only to serve, still managed to create something extraordinary. They invented the future. They built the foundation of the world we live in today. Not because anyone made them, not because aliens gave them technology, but because they chose to, because they were capable of it, because they were human. And if they could do that in the shadow of the ziggurats, believing they were slaves to the gods, what might we do now, with all our knowledge, all our technology, all our connection, if we chose to believe that we are not slaves at all, that we were not made for someone else's purpose but are free to define our own? But there is a deeper layer to this that demands exploration. The question of why these stories, whether read literally or metaphorically, continue to exert such a powerful hold on the human imagination. The answer lies in what they reveal about the fundamental structures of consciousness, power and meaning that shape human existence across all eras. When you look closely at the Atrahasis, at the creation of humanity through the mixing of clay and divine blood, you are looking at something profound. You are looking at the eternal human question of identity and origin. What are we made of? The ancient answer is, we are made of earth and heaven, matter and spirit, body and consciousness. We are hybrid beings caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Modern science gives us a different vocabulary but arrives at a similar conclusion. We are stardust and neurons, atoms forged in dying stars configured through billions of years of evolution into structures capable of contemplating their own existence. We are meat that thinks, chemistry that dreams, matter that has become self-aware. The Sumerian scribes did not have the language of molecular biology or cosmology, but they were wrestling with the same mystery. How can Earth become conscious? How can clay know that it's clay? Their answer was that it requires a divine spark, the blood of a sacrificed god mixed into the material substrate. Our answer is that it requires billions of years of natural selection creating information processing systems of sufficient complexity. The vocabularies differ. The core insight is the same. Consciousness is an emergent property that arises when matter organizes itself in specific ways. The creation story is also a story about purpose and meaning. In the Sumerian worldview, our purpose is given from outside ourselves by our creators. We exist to serve. This provides a clear answer to the question that haunts every thinking person, why am I here? But it is a deeply unsatisfying answer, because it denies agency, autonomy, the possibility of self-determination. The Enlightenment promised us freedom from this externally imposed purpose. The idea that we could define our own meaning, create our own values, determine our own destiny. This was supposed to be liberating, and in many ways it has been. But it has also created a crisis of meaning. If there is no external purpose, if we truly are just accidents of chemistry and evolution, then on what basis do we decide how to live? What makes anything matter? The enduring appeal of the ancient astronaut theory, and of religious fundamentalism more broadly, is that it offers an escape from this existential vertigo. It says, no, you do have an external purpose. You were designed. Your existence has meaning built into it from the outside. You are not alone. You're not random. You are part of a plan, even if that plan is deeply unsettling. This is why millions of people find Sitchin's narrative compelling despite its academic rejection. It restores a sense of cosmic significance to human existence. We are not accidents. We are creations. We are experiments. We are perhaps failed experiments, but we are intentional nonetheless. This feels better than the alternative of pure meaninglessness. Even if the meaning it offers is that we were created to be slaves, there is also the question of power and its legitimation. Every hierarchical society needs a myth that explains and justifies why some people have power over others. The Sumerian answer was that the gods decreed it. The divine right of kings, the mandate of heaven, the natural order of things established at the moment of creation. This is an incredibly effective social technology. If the hierarchy is cosmic, then resistance to it is not just rebellion against human authority, but rebellion against the fundamental structure of reality itself. This is why revolutions are so rare and so difficult. To overthrow a social order, you must first overthrow the myths that make it seem natural and inevitable. The modern democratic ideal attempts to do this by locating sovereignty not in gods or kings, but in the people themselves. We the people are the source of political authority. But even in democracies, hierarchies persist. Wealth inequality, corporate power, unelected bureaucracies all create systems where a few make decisions that affect the many. And these systems, like the ancient ones, require legitimating myths. We call them meritocracy, economic efficiency, expertise, the invisible hand of the market, progress. These are our me, are sacred principles that supposedly make the system work and justify its outcomes. When people lose faith in these myths, when they begin to suspect that the system is not actually designed for their benefit, that is when they start looking for alternative explanations. That is when conspiracy theories flourish. The ancient astronaut theory is, in this sense, a counter-myth that challenges the legitimating narratives of modern technocratic capitalism by suggesting that the whole system, not just this particular political arrangement but the entire human condition, is the result of extraterrestrial design and ongoing manipulation. This brings us to the question of belief itself. What does it mean to believe in the Anunnaki? For some, it is literal belief. They are convinced that Sitchin's translations are correct, that the mainstream academic consensus is part of a cover-up, that there really is a planet Nibiru on a 300-year orbit inhabited by ancient astronauts who created us and will return. For others, it is something more complex. They find the narrative compelling not because they think it is factually true, but because it is metaphorically or psychologically true. It expresses something they feel about the human condition, the sense that we are controlled by forces beyond our understanding, that our history has been manipulated, that those in power are hiding important truths. This is why debunking ancient astronaut theories with facts and evidence, while intellectually necessary, is often psychologically ineffective. The people who believe are not primarily looking for factual accuracy. They are looking for a narrative that makes sense of their experience of powerlessness, alienation, and existential confusion. Telling them that Sitchin mistranslated the Sumerian words does not address the underlying need that the theory is fulfilling. It is like telling someone in the depths of depression that they should just think positive thoughts. The problem is not cognitive, it is existential. And existential problems require existential solutions, not just better data. What then is the existential solution? How do we address the needs that these ancient myths and modern reinterpretations speak to without succumbing to fantasies that disconnect us from reality? This is perhaps the most important question we can ask. The answer begins with honesty about the human condition. Yes, we live in hierarchical societies where power is unequally distributed. Yes, we are often powerless in the face of systems too complex to understand and too entrenched to change. Yes, our existence may have no cosmic purpose beyond what we create for ourselves. Yes, we are going to die, and everyone we love is going to die, and everything we build will eventually crumble to dust. These facts are uncomfortable. They are terrifying. They create anxiety, depression, and a desperate search for meaning. The ancient Sumerians dealt with these facts by creating elaborate mythologies that placed their suffering in a cosmic context. We were made to serve. Our labour has divine purpose. Our deaths are ordained by the gods as a compromise after the flood. Our hierarchy is a reflection of the celestial hierarchy. These myths did not make the suffering go away, but they made it bearable by giving it meaning. The modern response, especially in secular Western societies, has been to reject these myths as superstition and to seek meaning through progress, through science, through the accumulation of knowledge and the improvement of material conditions. This has worked remarkably well in many respects. We have longer lifespans, less physical suffering, more freedom, more information than any previous generation, but we have not eliminated existential anxiety. In some ways, we have amplified it by removing the old myths without providing new ones to replace them. The ancient astronaut theory can be understood as an attempt to create a new myth that synthesizes the old religious worldview with modern scientific language. It gives us creators, purpose, and cosmic significance, but it dresses them in the language of genetics, space travel, and planetary orbits rather than virgin births and burning bushes. It is a myth for the scientific age, even if its science is questionable. And like all myths, its power comes not from its factual accuracy, but from its resonance with deep psychological and social needs. So where does this leave us? Do we embrace the myth because it fulfills psychological needs? Do we reject it because it fails empirical tests? The answer is that we need to do something more difficult than either of those options. We need to develop the capacity to hold complexity, to acknowledge that myths can be psychologically powerful without being literally true, that the Sumerian texts can be both profound and mistaken, that we can honour the human need for meaning without abandoning critical thinking. The Atrahasis is not a genetic engineering manual, but it is a powerful exploration of human nature, labour, suffering, and our relationship to power. The Anunnaki were not aliens, but they represent something real about how humans experience authority as something external, overwhelming, and often incomprehensible. The clay tablets speak to us across 4,000 years, not because they contain hidden technical knowledge, but because they contain enduring human wisdom. They tell us that our ancestors faced the same existential questions we face. They wondered who made them and why. They struggled with unjust hierarchies. They sought meaning in suffering. They told stories to make sense of their world. Their stories were wrong about the facts. The gods did not create humans to mine gold or dig canals, but their stories were right about something deeper. That humans have always felt like we were made for purposes not our own, that we have always struggled against systems that exploit our labour, that we have always looked to the sky for answers that never quite come. The real revelation hidden in the cuneiform is not about aliens or ancient technology. It is about continuity. The fundamental structures of human consciousness, society and meaning-making have not changed. We are still asking the same questions. We are still building the same types of hierarchies. We are still trying to legitimate them with myths. We are still working jobs that feel meaningless, serving systems that feel overwhelming, wondering if there is something more. The Sumerians knew this feeling intimately. They wrote it into their creation myth. You were made to work. Your creators need you, but they do not love you. You exist at their pleasure. This is your nature. This is your fate. But they also wrote something else into their myths. They wrote the story of Gilgamesh, who refused to accept his fate and went searching for immortality. They wrote the story of Inanna, who tricked Enki and stole the me, bringing power to her city. They wrote the story of Enki himself, who repeatedly defies the harsh commands of Enlil to save humans from destruction. Even within a mythological system built on the premise that humans exist to serve, there are heroes who resist, who question, who demand something more. This is the true message of the Sumerian legacy. We may be made of clay, but we do not have to accept the potter's plan. We may live under hierarchies, but we do not have to believe they are ordained by heaven. We may labour for systems we did not design, but we can work to redesign them. The Sumerian texts do not give us that answer. No ancient text can, but they ask the question. They force us to confront the possibility that our entire understanding of why we exist might be shaped by the needs of power rather than the truth of our nature. That is the real revelation hidden in the clay. Not that aliens made us, but that humans have always made themselves, and that the stories we tell about our origins shape what we believe is possible. The Anunnaki are gone. If they were ever here, the ziggurats are ruins, the cuneiform is silent. But the question remains, alive and urgent. What were we made for? And more importantly, what will we make of ourselves? You set down the clay tablet. The ancient library fades. You return to the present, carrying with you not answers but something more valuable. Questions that have no expiration date. Mysteries that resist simple solutions. And the knowledge that whether we were designed by gods, evolved by chance, or created by aliens, we are now the architects of our own destiny. The choice of what to build, what to believe, and what to become is ours. It has always been ours. The Sumerians knew this, even as they bent their backs beneath the weight of the ziggurats. They wrote their truth in clay so it would last forever. Now it is our turn to write ours.